Yvette Amirian here on the Hollywood Editing Mentor podcast. You're someone that kind of bounces back and forth between, documentaries, scripted TV, and now feature films. So definitely want to just get to know more about how you've been able to do that. But before we even get into that, I just want to hear how you got interested in editing and then eventually made your way to the edit chair.
I learned how to edit at a very young age. I was really fortunate to go to a high school that had sort of a media communications program, and we happened to have access to Avid Media Composer, which was the first program that I learned on, and very self-taught, just sort of sat down literally with the book, as a high schooler, young high schooler, looked through it and kind of fell in love with that process of crafting a story, using that program. And then I went to USC's film school, learned how to cut on film, and sort of even more fell in love with it and experimented a lot with a lot of different things. I tried writing, directing, producing, acting, costume, makeup, you name it. I tried it and just really, really loved editing and stuck with it, and worked as an assistant, both in narrative, documentaries, and worked my way up very quickly on the documentary side as an editor, and I've made a lot of transitions in my career, both in my personal life, my work life. I at one point was editing documentaries, then I was running post on scripted series, cutting scripted movies, and sort of moved back and forth quite a bit. And more recently, over the past, I'd say 5 years, it's primarily not been TV, but documentary features and narrative features and projects.
So, take us back to, say, when you were starting out. You said you started documentaries. Was it at the beginning, is that what you wanted to do? Or you were just kind of like, you know what, I want to get my career started. I'm just going to get a job.
I always wanted to cut narrative features. And the first few projects that I assisted were narrative projects. It was an interesting time when I graduated from USC, which is where I went to film school. And I was talking to someone about this last night, actually at a panel. I think there was a really big push to just get a job. Just get a job and just work, make money. We want to make sure to show your parents, your colleagues, all the people we want to make sure we can show them you're getting a job. That was sort of the perspective of the professors that I had, the people who were mentoring me at the time. And not to say that it was bad advice, but I wish someone had maybe guided me a little bit differently, because I didn't realize until I was in it that you do tend to get a little bit stereotyped and pigeonholed in this industry, no matter what, whether you're an actor, DP, editor, whatever. And one of my first assistant projects was on a documentary feature, and that editor happened to give me, and I'm grateful for this, of course, give me a lot of stuff to cut. And that company realized very quickly, this person is really good with crafting story. And I don't know that I think I knew that, but it was my first time really cutting documentaries, and I got kind of sucked into that world. They kept giving me show after show after show, and it was at a time where I was getting married and we were buying a house and having a kid, so it very quickly became the world that I was in, and a little bit harder to break out, even though I really wanted to cut narratives. But I think a lot of people who have tried to make that transition will often look at it as a narrative, like, oh, I got stuck. But my perspective on that, now that I've done both, has changed significantly, because if I didn't have that experience of being a documentary editor, I don't think that I would be as good as I am as a narrative editor. I learned so much during that process from, of course, crafting story, because you're often working without a script, but, dealing with personalities, dealing with politics, dealing with how to work a room, all of those things come very naturally, because you're working so hard on you're so many things. You're a producer, you're a writer, you're an editor. So I love that process, and I learned so much doing it. And I think it really helped me get to where I am. And I'm really proud of that journey.
Yeah. Can you talk to us more about what it takes to be, say, a good documentary editor and what it involves?
Sure. I think the number one thing to understand is, obviously, you don't have a script. Oftentimes it's just here's a pile of footage, figure out what to do with it. And of course, depending on the budget, depending on if it's a series or a movie, you will have a team of people working with you, assistant editors, story producers, and whatnot. So that was one of the things I really liked about that world, because there was that collaboration of working with your director, working with your producers, your showrunners to be able to craft that. But a lot of it is just you sitting in a room, figuring it out. Yes, you're mapping out the big pieces like you would on any project, on storyboarding it and figuring out what's in act one, what's in act two, and so on. But a lot of the pieces, you can give someone a guide and say, this happens, and then this happens, and then we're going to go to this scene. But what happens within that scene? It's not 2-person camera coverage and you're cutting back and forth, medium, close up, this and that. It's, do I even have the pieces to tell the story that is on my board that I'm going to tell? Maybe the character doesn't actually say it as clearly as they should. Am I going to have to ADR that line? Am I going to have to use a technique like voiceover? Or am I going to have to insert an interview here? So a lot of that varies between documentaries. What are the elements? I have a friend who's working on a documentary that's in it's just kind of verite. It's just verite, not a lot of interview, not a lot of speaking. And it's so challenging to put those types of projects together, and also really fun. I think you have to have that patience to be able to do it. I don't know that it's for everybody. I love the challenge of creating something that doesn't exist. And I guess I was really good at it. I am really good at it. And like I said, I think it served me well in multiple genres, having done that. And organization, I was going to say yes, in scripted editing, I think we rely very heavily on our assistants to be able to do a lot of that. But in documentaries, that's one of the other key differences for me is I have to be very specific about the way things are organized, depending on the project. I have to do a lot of the sound and music work myself. And that's another thing that has helped me significantly in that transition to narrative is I'm so accustomed to doing that myself because it impacts so much of the pace and the tone of what you're creating. I
wanted to ask you, though, bring this up because oftentimes, for example, whether it be assistants or editors who are working, saying unscripted, it's kind of the stigma that, if you do unscripted, you can't work in scripted, right? What would you have to say to that, I guess, to someone that says, you know what? Yeah, you can't, unscripted people can't do, say, scripted work.
Yeah. I want to say I personally hate that mentality and I disagree with it. And I think, it cuts across everything, not just unscripted to scripted, but I have friends who are comedy people and they've had a hard time transitioning to drama, or if someone just does animation, can they do live action? And I hate that because I feel like editing is editing. It's just different types of muscles that you're using. And I think that's the big thing that I think actually editors understand that more. I for some reason, it seems to be more of an issue amongst producers or directors. And to some degree, look, I understand it. Especially if a director's kind of new or green, they want to make sure that the person who's working with them is somewhat seasoned. And I'm sure the same thing could go for their other key members on their team for sure. I think sometimes there's a little bit of hesitation on the part of do we want to, waste time on this person who might not be able to deliver, as opposed to saying, hey, this person actually has this tremendous wealth of experience and is probably going to kill it. We just have to give them, that opportunity. And that's one of the interesting things that's been coming up in a lot of conversations I've been having with colleagues who have been in similar positions is that there is so much of that lack of opportunity or that lack of trust or that lack of, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, belief, taking a chance. And so for me, it's been really important. Like you and I have talked a lot about mentorship and how important that is, that when I have those opportunities to be able to give people a chance, whether it's assistance or, even being able to put other friends up for projects that maybe I'm passing on, I really like to be able to do that. I don't know how to break that stigma. It's something that seems really cemented in the industry. And I felt it certainly since I was working because I've consistently gone back and forth between both. And I said it to a scripted editor friend recently that I feel like when you look at my work on paper, it maybe some people are confused about it. And she was so upset with me, why would anybody think that's a bad thing? That's a great thing that you have all this experience. And I really appreciated that. And if she's listening, she knows who this is because it was very recent. And I wish more people thought like that. And that's why I say, I think editors maybe don't feel it as much as producers, showrunners, directors, because ultimately they're the people who have to do that hiring and make those decisions. And maybe they don't want it to fall on their shoulders if it doesn't work out, which I don't know. I wish there was more taking chances and giving more opportunities. So where I can, I do it.
I want to go back to say when then you are working in documentaries and you brought something up here that I think is very important to talk about because, just talking about this career, right? You have to pay the bills, right? And you have a family, you might have a house and all this stuff, right? So I understand maybe going down one path. You have to do that, right? You have to analyze your situation and kind of base it on that and say, if I got to work, I got to work, right? And this is what I'm doing, right? But you obviously had a goal or a dream of working, say, in narrative. At what point do you say, all right, I'm going for it? And then how do you do it?
This is a great question. And I'm sure, and I appreciate the fact that you bring that up, because I think it's one of the things that people don't talk about enough, is that there is this, it's wonderful to have a dream, but there is a reality to it, especially living here in LA. For me, I got married very young. I had my first child very young, and then I had another child 8 years later. So while I love that, that's part of my story, it has inevitably sort of slowed me down because I've had to stop down a couple of times. And then you couple that with the realities of having 2 kids and having a partnership and, having a house, all these things that you have to pay for. Yeah, that was a big reason why I wasn't able to do the natural, just take a step back to assisting or cut some projects on the side. The thing is that I actually attempted to do that stuff despite it. And it was really difficult because on top of being a supervising editor on a non-scripted series, I was also cutting projects on the side, and I was also raising a kid, and I was also I did all of it. And I really, I can't say I didn't try, but there were realities that, at one point I transitioned I was supervising post on a scripted series. So I took a step back, I guess, I don't know if you could call it a step back. I guess I took a step back in pay, but I was producing. So that's technically a step forward. And you know what? It's part of my story. And I got to do casting, and I got to write, and I got to be on set, and I got to do all these amazing things that I wouldn't have gotten that experience had I not, had that opportunity. Where I got to the point, to answer your question, my husband eventually got to the point where his business was a little bit more secure. And that gave me an opportunity to finally say, I think I'm done with this for a while, because I couldn't do that financially for a very long time. So I'm very grateful to him. And that's where, if you're in a partnership, having those open, honest discussions, very real discussions about, hey, I'm unhappy doing this. This isn't what I ultimately want to do. I have to be able to take the step back, or I'll regret it. Funny enough, that decision point came for me when my younger son was, I want to say, 6 months old. And it was the end of February 2020. And obviously I didn't know. And then the pandemic happened. So it was this weird intersection and blessing in disguise. So I was on a big doc feature that I ended up stopping down on. Then I kind of ended up helping them through the pandemic a little bit to finish it out, and just started really putting it out there that I wanted to do this. And one of the first opportunities that came along was this movie, The Integrity of Joseph Chambers, which I'm really grateful I got to do. But in addition to that, I cut a couple of short projects, which as I told you, are making festival rounds. And, a lot of just personal progress, getting an agent and being able to go to Tribeca with a film. It was if I hadn't put it out there, and if I hadn't actually made that switch and committed to doing it, it wouldn't have happened. And I think that's a big thing, is, finding the point that it realistically makes sense, no matter how long it takes. It'll eventually come if you're working toward it, and if you're properly saving, and if you're, doing all those things. So it takes some legwork, and if you're in a partnership, it takes a lot of difficult conversations. But if it's something that's really in your heart, it's worth doing for sure.
Oh, I love hearing that, and thank you for sharing your story, because it's important to communicate this and share this, because, like you said, this is the reality of what we do, right? And it's important to share our kind of these experiences, because, look, I hear a lot of stuff, say, stories or situations from my mentees, for example, right? And I try to be honest with them and say, you know what, look, sure, look, everything is possible, right? But you got to analyze your situation and kind of develop a strategy based around that, right? And having maybe difficult conversations with your partner, or, whoever, and be more strategic about your decisions, right? And it's going to probably take some hard work, but it can totally be done.
And time. I think that was one of the big things for me, is my husband's really great about reminding me of this, but I'm sure, I think we all get to this, but I'm constantly I feel behind, or I want to do more. I want to do the next thing. And sometimes it's hard to take a step back and look at everything that you've done and go, actually, I've done pretty great, and giving yourself that credit to say, this is just part of my journey, and there's so much more to go. And I think we often feel I have to have achieved this by this age, and I had kids before all these different things. And it's just, what, all those things make me a better editor and storyteller. So
absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Everyone has their time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to happen when it needs to happen. And don't be, some people happens faster, For
For
others,
sure.
it doesn't, like didn't for me, right?
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
fine. I'm comfortable with it. I'm just happy to be doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
So I guess, practical steps that you take to then like shift into narrative filmmaking?
I think the big thing was just outreach, just expanding my network. I started to realize that a big reason why it wasn't happening was because I was consistently working with the same people, and they're wonderful people and I love them and I'll work with them again, hopefully, God willing. But it was always, when you're good at what you do, you're going to constantly get called back, and that's a great thing. But I really wanted to expand that network. So I worked really hard to reach out to friends who I hadn't spoken to in a really long time, just sort of reached out to filmmakers maybe who I really admired. And I was so scared to do that before, but I really just started putting it out there and leaning into what my strengths were and, all the things that I'm really proud of. Reworking my resume was another big thing because, like I said, one of the hard things for me was I had a lot of documentary, a lot of scripted. I also had some producing, I also had some writing, and it was very confusing. So reworking my website, which I'm actually doing again right now, now that I have the film and a couple more of these scripted projects. So that's like a constant process. I have like a Word document of my resume. So I just found out that one of the shorts that I had cut won a big award. So and I have to go through, and you're constantly like upgrading that stuff. And you have to, you and I were talking about this recently, like you have to be the one to advocate for yourself. You have to be the one to put yourself out there. And it's so hard for a lot of editors because we're naturally like these introverts who like sit in our dark rooms, which don't get me wrong. Like I'm here and I'm talking about this very openly, but it took me a very long time to get to that point to be comfortable doing it. And networking, going to networking events, again, it all comes down to expanding your circle because just planting those seeds. You have no idea when somebody is going to turn around and say, I need someone who has documentary experience because it would really fit well with this, or I need someone who's whatever, a female editor or this or that. Like you have no idea unless you've put yourself out there and planted the seeds that you're interested in doing this. That's a lot of where this came from, is I had planted those seeds and this opportunity came my way.
Well, yeah, that's why you'll never stop hearing me say this, right? It's like the same thing. It's like, put yourself out there. That's why I tell all my mentees, to everyone, you have to communicate your goals, what you want. You got to let people know.
I think that was also like a big turning point for me. There was a project that when it came out, I had just had my second son, and I remember it coming out, and it was a documentary actually. And I was like, why didn't they think of me? And I went back and I was like, well, I've lost touch with them. Number one, they don't really know what I've been up to because I haven't been like putting myself out on social media or emailing people about it. And that was a big turning point for me because I was like, they just don't know that, not that I don't, some people don't know like you exist, but some people just don't know what you've been up to. So it was a big like wake up call, like no one else is going to do this for you. You have to do it. You are a business. You are your own, I don't know. Yeah, you're your own business. You are. So you have to be the one to put yourself out there. No one's going to do it for you.
Well, speaking of, you are a mother. And this is a very demanding job, right? We work long hours, right? We tend to. How do you balance that life, say being a mother and having a husband, having a family and doing this type of work?
I wish I had a good answer to that question. That feels like I totally have it all under control, because I don't. And anybody who says that they do, I think they're lying. I think being a parent in any industry, if you're a working parent in this day and age, I think it's just hard, period. A lot of my sort of personal network of moms who work, they don't work in the industry, number one. A lot of them have like part-time kind of situations, which obviously you can't have that in this industry. It's sort of all or nothing. I think the one benefit for me and the thing that took me the longest time to get to is oftentimes in this industry, we tend to be like, what are you working on? What are you working on next? And you're like, I can't say I'm not working on anything. And it took me a long time to be like, sometimes I just have to not take this next job if it doesn't fit my family and my needs, or isn't maybe adding something to my resume, or doesn't, qualify as something that's going to get me the money, like whatever. There's a lot of different elements, but again, something that took me a very, very long time is learning how to say no to the projects that aren't benefiting me or my family. So I went from, when I had my first kid, I was still working close to like, I'd say between 40 and 50 weeks a year, nonstop, full-time nanny. I also, I was in my 20s when I had my first son. So my mom and mother-in-law, God bless them, they were willing to, he was like the first grandbaby, they would like fight over who got to watch him. So, and we were very blessed to live very close to our parents. So they were a huge help. Now, fast forward 8 years later with the second one, they're significantly older. It's a lot harder. It's two, I think, is like a kind of a game changer. So it just takes a lot of organizing and planning, which thankfully I'm a very organized person. But, and I think it's different, frankly, for moms and dads, depending on who the person is, who's sort of the working parent or like the person who has a harder position, let's say in the film industry or whatever, balancing that with your partner. I'm so grateful that I have, my husband is a business owner, so his schedule is a little bit more flexible. So when I'm about to take a job, it just takes a lot of planning. Who's going to pick them up? Who's going to drop them off? Whose house are they going to go to? Is the babysitter going to come after school? Am I working from home? Am I working from an office? Like really getting very, very organized and making sure everyone's on board. Like for me, that's been the key. And then, like I said, just not taking every job that comes your way. Is just saying, okay, this was a great one. I know that it's going to come out next year or in 6 months or whatever it is. And it's going to, or I have this other thing coming up that's going to financially sustain me. And so I'm able to say no to the next thing that doesn't quite fit that criteria. So learning how to say no more has been a huge thing. Again, like I said, if you have like a grandma who's a full-time babysitter or something, like that's a different story. But for me, having a nanny or a babysitter or some kind of childcare has been key. Even with them going to school now, that's still something that I've needed when I'm working, because let's face it, our job doesn't stop at 3 p.m.
No way.
And then I think in addition to that, obviously working from home has been a huge game changer, and working with people who either have families themselves or who are more family friendly, because that's been a huge thing for me is like, okay, yes, maybe I have to stop down at 5 o'clock to go be with them and do bedtime, but you can bet that I'm going to come back at 9 and work until 2 o'clock in the morning, because that's just the way that I operate. It's not like my day is done at 5 o'clock. My work ethic is very strong. And if it's in my head and if I know I got to get it done, like I'm going to get it done. So finding people who understand that, who believe that I'm going to do it, who believe in my work ethic, who trust that, those are like the things that have helped me. I can't speak to everyone. I know everyone's situation is very different. But for me, those have been like the big things that have helped, maintain that balance, whatever you want to call it. Working from home, working with people who are family friendly, and just learning how to say no to the things that don't serve you and your family and your career moving forward.
Well, much respect to you, because I don't know how you do it. I mean, because I don't have kids, and I'm like, wow, I have a hard time really, balancing out this editing gig and everything else, right? I
mean, look, when you love what you do, it would be very easy to just be like, you know what, this is too hard. I'm going to find something else. I can go back to producing. I can go back, I can do those things. I just love editing too much, and I really believe that I have something more to give, and I want to be able to see that through. And there can always come a point where you say this is too hard. And for me, I just haven't. I mean, I guess I have gotten there, because it is really hard, but I'm not willing to stop, because I don't feel like I've done everything that I want to do. So I think a lot of it is just that perseverance. It's something that's in me, like I said, that work ethic. And thankfully I have a group of people around me who are very supportive. And I think also just talking about it, like talking about being a parent in this industry, I every opportunity that I get, I'm very vocal about it, because I don't think it's done enough. And I think, unfortunately, we are trained to don't tell them you have kids at the interview. Don't tell them these kinds of things. And for me, when it naturally comes up, like if somebody says that they have a kid in an interview, I lean into it, because I'm like, I want to get a sense of what their work-life balance is like, how they operate. Are they willing to be flexible? Those kinds of things are important. I mean, not even when you're a parent. I think even without kids, I think it's important to be able to maintain our health and our emotional well-being. So
yeah, no, it's good to have these open conversations, whether it be about parenting, money, finances, and just the realities again of what it takes to do, or what's involved, I guess, in his job. That's besides simply editing, right? There's so many other things.
It's so much more than just editing. Yeah.
So speaking of editing, I mean, let's talk about your most recent film, The Integrity of Joseph Chambers. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to hear, more about this film, but how did you, so, you talked about, say, your journey now to narrative filmmaking. I mean, how did you get this gig?
Yeah. So one of the producers, who was a mutual friend of mine and my husband's, had sort of put my name in the hat, so to speak. Had a conversation with the producers. They put me in touch with Robert Machoian, who's the writer and director. And we had like one conversation and really hit it off. He actually had a film that he produced that he wrote and directed in 2020 that played at Sundance, The Killing of Two Lovers, that he cut himself. So I think I was a little bit intimidated in that, oh gosh, like if he's cut it himself, what's that process going to be like? Is he going to be this very overly involved director? And he was not, and he was in the best way. Like he let me have that creative freedom to cut it initially the way that I saw it. And then we worked very collaboratively to shape it into what his vision for the film was. And I'm proud to say that for the most part, it was pretty spot on with what he wanted. And of course we worked together to craft it and, make it better. So when I was brought onto the film, they shot it, I think in December of 2020. And then I started cutting it at the beginning of 2021 because of COVID. I couldn't go out there. It was like a whole thing. And yeah, he lives in Utah and I'm in LA. So we were working remotely. And that was a very unique experience because even though I've worked remotely where like, let's say I'll bring a hard drive home or, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was working on like the whole like jump desktop thing for the documentary that I was working on. This was the first one where it was like all the way through, you were working remotely. So that was, I think ideally it would have been nice if we were in a room together, but it actually, I think like helped us kind of develop our relationship, as a director and an editor in a little bit of a different way. And then of course, once we came together for sound and ADR and the final changes and things like that, it was like, oh, we've known each other kind of forever. So it was really cool.
I mean, you talk about obviously your documentary experience, any skills or things that you learned from that Diamond documentary that you brought over to this film and used it to tell this story?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were fortunate that we had a great cast and really wonderful performances. There were several parts of the film that one in particular that he and I will often like reminisce and sort of talk about that it just didn't, not to say like it didn't execute on camera, but it didn't pan out on camera the way I think he had envisioned it when he had written it. It was supposed to be a section of the film where the character was sort of wandering through the woods, but geographically and sort of timing wise, lighting wise, it didn't all match up. And I think he was very frustrated that it wasn't working. And I said, can you just give me a few days with it? Within a couple of days, I sort of like reworked it and sort of did my thing. Cause I often like will see it in my head and I just need the time to be able to reshuffle it. And I remember I still have the text from him. He was like, wow, how'd you do that? And I think he understands because he himself is a documentary filmmaker or has a background in documentaries, that he understands that power in reshaping scenes. And so that was definitely a moment where that helped. It was just having that knowledge of how you can move things around, how you can kind of use the trickery that you use in documentary editing. That's so often part of our toolbox to be able to do that. So that was a really cool moment for me. And I think it was also, even though we had been working really well together, I think that was a moment where he went like, oh, like she can do so much, Yeah,
I'm assuming, and that was something kind of how you possibly, I mean, I'm sure connected, say during the interview, right? I mean, especially you both had experience in it.
In documentaries, yeah, that was definitely something that came up. Yeah, I think often when somebody has a background in documentary editing, or documentary filmmaking, I think because they understand the unique challenges that come with that, they see the benefit of having someone with that experience on their team, and I think that's certainly he recognized that in me, and I'm grateful, like I said, for him to have brought me on because it was a really one of the best, if not the best, collaborations that I've had with a filmmaker. So there's a scene at the end that I just love that we ended up paring it back a little bit more, like kind of toward the tail end. So it was this sort of like constantly evolving thing, even up until like the end of it. Even after we had mixed it, we ended up making some changes and really paring back on some things that I think benefited the film. And it's always hard. Like even watching it at Tribeca, I was texting him like, we probably could have done, we probably could have taken this out.
There's always something, right?
There's always something. And he's like, it's too late. Leave it alone.
Yeah.
So yeah. But I'm proud of it. I'm happy how it turned out. That one particular sequence that I'm talking about was probably the most challenging. I think just a lot of experimentation. There was one scene that a lot of critics have been talking about the character's performance, that we opted to stay on a single shot of the truck, of like him in front of the truck all the way through, kind of having this breakdown. And there was a way that we could have done it where we could have like cut, jump time to another moment. And that was initially the way that it was written. And I found a really interesting way to cut it. So it's sort of like, it scared you, and it is a thriller. So there are moments where like, that was one of the interesting things watching it in a theater, is that people actually jumped and had their hands over their mouths. And I was like, oh gosh, like they're having these reactions that they're supposed to have. I really wanted to do that. And, that was something that he really wanted to see that performance all the way through. And I'm happy that we made that decision. I think it was the right one. But there were times where we could have gone in different directions. So there was just a lot of experimentation. And I think one of the other things that I did as an editor that he has expressed to me he really appreciated is when I'm doing my initial assembly, I'll cut it the way that he and I have talked about, that I know he wants to see it. But I also had in my back pocket, like, here's another option. And I know a lot of editors do that, but I do it like religiously. So I'll always have like, I know you like this performance, but I think this is better. I know you like, this is the cut that you wanted, but what if we cut this, whatever, this piece of this dialogue out, or this scene out, or whatever it is? What if we reshuffled this? And it's sort of like saved a step, because it was something that we probably would have had to do later. But I think he appreciated the fact that I was thinking that far ahead, to say, here's another option just so you have it. And it made it really easy to look at that and go, oh yeah, that's great. I really like that better. Let's come back to that. Or no, I really like it this way. So
speaking about that, I mean, like, how would what advice would you give to other editors about, say, when if they encounter, say, a situation where they don't agree, say maybe with a director's choice, right, or where it's going? I mean, how do you communicate that in the proper way?
Well, I mean, thankfully he and I had like a kind of a shorthand and a relationship that developed in the process of doing that initial, thing, that initial assembly, that by the time I think we got to those points, we really bounced things well off of each other. So that worked out really well. I think a lot of it depends on how close you are with the person. If you have that shorthand, and if you have that ability to say, yeah, I don't know, that's kind of I don't really agree with that idea. But I think especially when you're working with someone for the first time, my rule is always, you cut it the way that they wanted, you show them, and then you have these things in your back pocket and you work on it together. And at the end of the day, my perspective is like, it's not my movie. It's their vision, and I'm there to help execute it to the best of my ability. That doesn't mean that I don't, have a voice, or that I won't be vocal if I disagree with something, or if I really think that they're shooting themselves in the foot. I'll always raise my voice and say that. So I think it's a very delicate balance. I think a lot of it is judgment. Are you feeling like you're welcome to be able to have that voice? If you're not, like, maybe the project is just not the right fit for you. So I never felt that with him. Obviously, we had a great working relationship. I haven't had that a lot in a lot of projects, thankfully. I've always been I feel lucky that I've been respected. And anytime that I haven't, it's sort of, maybe it's not the right fit for me.
What do you want people to get out of this film? I mean, what do you hope that people experience from watching the integrity of Joseph Chambers? And also, how would you just summarize your experience cutting this feature film?
My experience cutting the film was very insightful, eye-opening. I think it was the thing that I needed to make me go, okay, this is really what I'm meant to be doing, and I want to do more of. And the fact that it has been as successful as it has been so far, and that it has gotten the responses that it's gotten so far, has been really encouraging and wonderful, and I've loved it. I think it deals a lot with human nature, what we do when we're faced with difficult predicaments, and how we respond to it, and how our fight or flight mechanism responds in those situations, and how one single mistake in your life can, throw something that's really well crafted off. And how do you respond to that? And do you have it within you to, come clean, tell the truth, maintain that integrity? And that's really what the film is about. I think it sort of forces you to look within yourself. I think Robert does that really well in his films. His last film touched a lot on relationships and marriage. And I think this one touches a little bit more on the self and how you respond to those difficult moments in life, and ego, and how your ego can get in the way, when you have taken something upon yourself that you're just not willing to see what other people see could be problematic. I hope that's what they get out of it. And it is crafted very much like a thriller. So I do hope that people have that sort of the responses that I was talking about, just as for a viewing experience for an audience, because that was really cool for me to be able to see those responses.
Awesome. Well, hey, everyone, you got to check out The Integrity of Joseph Chambers. Congrats again for some amazing work there, Yvette. I want to ask you something though here. We kind of brought up at the beginning of this conversation. You've obviously done documentary, you've won awards, you're cutting short films and now feature films. What do you have to say about, say, experimenting early on in your career as far as trying things out versus having more of a defined path?
This is interesting because I have a lot of students ask me this. I feel like there's like editing specifically, right? There's like a kind of tried and true path where you become an assistant and you slowly work your way up to editing. There's also this different route where you can be making films with your friends, and hopefully one of them gets into a film festival and you kind of grow with those filmmakers. Those are kind of the two paths that I've seen personally in terms of how one kind of goes into an editor, and there's intersection in that. You could be working as an assistant while you're cutting projects on the side and what have you. I wish, for me, knowing what I know now, I wish when I realized I wasn't happy in the genre or the world that I was working in, I wish I had backtracked earlier. But like I said, because of life circumstances, I didn't have that. I was very much chained to what I was doing, based on what else I had going on in my life. So I think before you're sort of, bogged down in that, family, life, kids, mortgage, if you have the ability to experiment, to figure out what genre do I like best, what do I like cutting the most, that's, ideally what you would sort of lean into. Or if you're working in something and you're like, oh gosh, I really dislike working in animation or whatever it is, make that backtrack earlier, especially as an assistant. I think it's easier to make it as an assistant than it is to make it as an editor. And I think don't be afraid to make transitions in your career. I think too many people, and this goes for all industries, my husband's made transitions in his career. My sister's done a lot of different things in her career. I mean, you're doing it. We have mutual friends who are doing it. I feel like there's too much, I don't know what the right word is, shame or guilt or whatever it is. And it's so silly. I don't know why it exists. I'm really proud of the fact that I've been able to do as much as I have, as an editor, as a producer, as a writer. So I think it makes me better at what I do. And I, don't let anyone dictate whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. So.
Well, I appreciate all that advice and appreciate you sharing your personal stories, both from being a parent and being an editor, and how those two, interject. And, it's definitely conversations that need to be had, because that's the reality of what we do. And congrats again on all your great work, on all your awards. And of course, now The Integrity of Joseph Chambers. Like I said, everyone, go check it out. Go see Yvette's work. And again, Yvette, pleasure here catching up with you. I hope you don't have to wait till the next EditFest.
I know. We should see each other before that, for sure.
Awesome, Yvette. Well, again, thank you for being here on the Hollywood Editing Mentor podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.